On my way to making over $1 million per year with e-commerce, there are so many mistakes that I made. So in this video, I just want to have a raw conversation with you where I tell you what I wish someone had told me when I started my journey, graduating from a 6-figure a year e-commerce seller to a 7-figure a year e-commerce seller. And I'll tell you what, the last point in this video is one of the craziest and most mind-boggling experiences I've had. And I can't believe I nearly let myself get screwed over for thousands and thousands of pounds by my accountant. So make sure you stick around to the end to find out what happened there and to learn the full story. So the first thing that I found for me with growing my e-commerce business from the 6 to 7-figure a year mark, that's actually when I started to quit my job. And I think for most people, this is that sort of point where if you're working in a job, this is where you need to start thinking about leaving and going all in on the business. Now for me, I actually did do this a little bit too early, and I would definitely recommend holding off for as long as you can. The main reason for this is because as soon as you leave your job, you're then going to be reliant on the business to be paying you money. So what you need to start doing before this, and to be fair, I actually done this quite well. I started by downgrading my car, although that turned out to be a long-term bad investment because of interest rates. I downgraded my car. I actually went to Asda and I bought a whole new load of t-shirts because I just needed some new clothes for the summer, and I bought some shorts from Primark. And like, these are just the things that really stick in my head as someone who always likes the nicer things. The fact that I went and spent like 10 or 20 quid on a whole new wardrobe of tops, and then I think about the same again on bottoms as well. For me, it was absolutely crazy. So lifestyle inflation, you can't let this happen. You almost need to go backwards because, like I mentioned earlier, you really need to make sure that you're not pulling too much out of the business because this will hurt your growth in the long term. Now, at multiple times over my journey from 6 to 7 figures, there was times where I was taking too much out of the business. I know there was one month in particular where I actually paid myself more than the entire profit of the business in that month. Now, this was a couple of years ago, and there are a couple of external factors that factored into this, such as just things that happen in life, you know, unexpected bills that come up, and obviously the business being my only source of income had to pay the price for this, unfortunately. One thing I would recommend if you are in that stage of starting to look from quitting your job to going all in on your business is look for some kind of flexible work. So for me, I actually done some Uber Eats driving at this time, and that was really, really helpful to actually improve my personal cash flow, so I didn't have to start taking as much money out of the business, because at the time I was actually under a VAT investigation and I had £13,000 tied up with HMRC that I couldn't get back. And by the way, £13,000 was pretty much all of the money that I had in my business, and I literally could have gone bust from this. So lifestyle inflation is going to be one of these massive things that will really hurt your business. So you need to go on a lifestyle deflation and really bring down your living costs as much as you possibly can. So in e-commerce, if you're making, let's say, 10,000 a month in sales, which is going to equate to about 120,000 a year, and let's say you have a 40% profit margin, which is obviously a very healthy profit margin, but in the early days as a solopreneur, it's definitely something that is very doable. So you're only going to be looking at about £4,000 or dollars in profit each month, and let's say you need at least 2,000 to just to fund your lifestyle. You've only then got £2,000 a month to start investing into your business for growth. So if you then take your ROI and apply that to £2,000 a month, you can kind of see how quickly you can grow just based on the amount of stock you can buy. But then if you need to scale by ads, which might have a slight delay, or maybe you need to scale in other ways, such as developing new products or hiring new team members, this will really, really impact the amount of stock you can buy to actually fulfill your customers. So unless you have a massive cash pile in your business, this will really, really hurt you, as it did for me. And I know a lot of other people as well. The general person that starts an e-commerce business doesn't have tens or hundreds of thousands of pounds or dollars to throw into the business. So really making sure that you are keeping your cash flow as high as possible is so, so important, and making sure you're also staying as profitable as possible as well. So to sum up this first point is to make sure that you stay in your job as long as you can, and then when you do decide to transition to your business, transition from your job either part-time or find some flexible work such as Uber driving or Uber Eats driving to supplement your income so you don't have to take too much from the business. The next thing is to also make sure that you're focusing on lifestyle deflation to make sure that you're bringing your personal living costs down as low as possible, and then you can always plan to bring these back up in the future. future and have some nicer things, because there is nothing wrong with having a year or a couple of years of pain and a lower lifestyle than you want to build yourself the future that you do want. Now, moving on to my second point is actually not having a mentor. Now, for me, for the majority of the time when I was going from 6 figures to 7 figures a year, I didn't actually have a proper mentor in place. Now, don't get me wrong, I bought courses and I've done online learning, read books and all of that. So I did learn, but I didn't actually have a mentor with me. And whilst mentors can be very expensive, I know that for me, the times when I've had the most explosive growth in any of my businesses, it's always been when I've been working with a mentor, or at least spending higher amounts on training. And I don't think this is something I've done enough, because I can kind of clearly see where my business just went from here to here all of a sudden. That is clearly when I signed up for some course or mentoring, and it all sort of tied together. And as I said, I did for the most part always have some kind of course or something going on, so I was always doing some learning, but it's really when I made those bigger investments into proper mentors that work with me a lot closer, at least one to many rather than a pre-recorded course. But obviously preferably you want someone that can work with you one-to-one. Now, as for finding a good mentor within the online business space, I know this can be hard, and the online education community doesn't necessarily have the best reputation, and obviously there are a lot of people that give the industry a bad name by not really either delivering on what they say they'll deliver, or at least teaching something that they don't actually practice themselves. So obviously you do want to stay away from that. But I know for me, I've definitely worked with a few people who are questionable as people who should be teaching you online. But at the end of the day, I found that actually these online gurus who maybe even don't do what they say they do or aren't as good as they say they are, they're usually very good at selling to you, and they've got quite good people skills, and they're quite good motivators. So actually the thing with this is I found that I've always got something from these trainings, even just on the fact of having this person by my side rooting for me, telling me to keep going and keeping my eye on the ball, even if they don't actually necessarily know what you need to do, and they might give you some bad advice in places, which I've definitely had, and I've definitely still got some bad habits to this day in my e-commerce business that I learned from people who didn't teach me the right way. Actually just having that person to keep on top of you, even if it's in a group setting, is really, really good, because for the most part, I think you kind of know what you need to do. Sometimes you just need someone to either just confirm it in your mind or actually just keep you going. And when you are having a bad day, just making sure you're still doing the most important things to keep growing your business. So I think for me, the times when I've had the most and best growth in my business, as I've said, has always been when I've had a mentor. Now, if you can't afford a one-to-one mentor, then definitely look for that group structure. I think having someone that teaches you live is so important, and whilst pre-recorded courses do serve their place, I think having someone that works with you in person is so much better. Now for me, if I want to know something that is very procedural knowledge, so for an example might be learning how to run ads on Amazon, then buying a pre-recorded course of this, absolutely not a problem. Or one thing I'd done, because I didn't want to spend the money on a freelancer to do it for me, is I actually signed up for a £30 a month course. It was a massive e-commerce course overall, but I just wanted to use it to learn how to build my Shopify store. So I spent, I think, probably 2 months within that course just learning how to build a Shopify, learning how to improve my Shopify. So overall it cost me £60, and I'm sure it was a few £100s to actually pay someone to do that for me. And now it also means that I do have a really good understanding of how my Shopify store works. So actually for me, as much as that took a lot of my time, that was a really worthwhile investment. And I do think that these pre-recorded courses have their places, but again, it's more for that sort of procedural knowledge that doesn't really necessarily leave too much up to the imagination, and where it's very much you just follow a set structure. So then to recap this section, for me, obviously the most important thing is to have a mentor, either in a one-to-one or a one-to group setting. And the next thing is to make sure you do utilize online courses, online education. It can be free, it can be paid, it doesn't really matter as long as it does what you need it to do. But use that for the more procedural knowledge, where it's all very black and white, almost a bit mathematical in the fact that 1 + 1 always equals 2. Now my third point is definitely something I've struggled with probably the most, and I'm sure anyone watching has also struggled with this as well. And that is sometimes just having a lack of patience and not believing, almost slipping out of the vision that you've set out for yourself. Now, if you haven't done this, stop this video and get off YouTube and write down what your dream life is, what you're actually working towards. Because if you don't have this, you've got nothing. You need to understand what you're working towards. But for me, the issue was sometimes it was either forgetting what I'm working towards, or thinking maybe that I wanted something different on one day because maybe I was having a bad day, or maybe I was just getting frustrated with how at the time I felt my bank account was just growing too slowly. And sometimes this does get frustrating and it does make you lose patience. And then this is where you always start looking elsewhere. So I've probably done this more times than I'd care to remember, about actually looking at different opportunities, whether that's when TikTok Shop first came along, looking at how I could create a service-based business rather than just focusing on my e-commerce business. And overall in the macro, I've stayed focused on my e-commerce business for the most part, but there has definitely been times in the micro where I've been distracted for a week or two and trying a side project, which didn't really excite me, and I was just doing it because I thought it was a bit more of a get-rich-quick scheme. And this is definitely something that I've struggled with in the past, and something I definitely recommend doing, like I said, is just make sure you have your ideas written down on a piece of paper. So when you're lacking patience and you're lacking maybe even a little bit of discipline, you look at what you're working towards, but then also make sure you're having some kind of documentation of how far you've come. Now for me, it's really simple. I have a very simple Notion page that I log into most weeks. I aim to do it at least every week. Some weeks I do forget, if I'm totally honest, but I do try and log in each week and just record some thoughts, whether that's about business or life, doesn't really matter. I just do a bit of a brain dump either on a Sunday evening or a Monday morning about what's on my mind, what I'm thinking about, what I'm excited about, or sometimes it can go a bit more of a negative tone, and it'll be like, oh, I'm frustrated because of this, or this happened this week so I don't have as much money in my bank account, or I've got to pay this person too much money, or whatever it might be. And this does really help, because then again, when you're having those moments where you're struggling to be patient and struggling to keep following the vision that you've maybe even laid out a year or a couple of years ago at this point, going back and looking at actually how far you've come can really help. Now, I'm not the sort of person that's going to sit and look at how far I've come and be like, oh, 2 years ago I had £1,000 in my bank account and now I've got this much in my bank account. That's not gonna work for me. But sometimes it can actually be quite motivating to realize how bad things were before, and actually in comparison to that, you're not doing too bad now. But for me, I'm not gonna sit there and be like, oh, I feel so good because of this. It's more actually remembering how bad the previous times were, so then by comparison this time is definitely better. So to recap on this section, you need to make sure that you do have your dream life and your big life's and business ambitions and vision written down, and something that you can come back to when you are lacking patience or maybe lacking discipline. Then also make sure you're keeping some kind of journal, whether that's a daily written entry, a weekly digital entry, or whatever works for you. Maybe you could even do voice notes and have AI transcribe it for you. Maybe that would work for you. But whatever it is, just make sure you have something so you can refer back and read it through and realize actually how far you have come. My last point is something that my last video was entirely focused on, and that is hiring. Now in this section, I don't necessarily mean hiring as I talked about in my previous video, which is hiring physical staff. It's more about hiring contractors and having people to help me. So again, I'll use the example that I mentioned earlier about my Shopify store, where I bought that course so I could learn how to build my Shopify store. But if you're actually thinking logically, the amount of time it took me to build that store out was probably not worth that maybe £100 to £200 I saved by building the store myself rather than paying someone on Fiverr to build it for me. For me, there's been way too many times where I've spent too much time on menial tasks that do not need to be done, that you can get someone else to do for so cheap. So for me, a part of my business is running on the Amazon platforms, and sometimes you get issues with uploading listings, and I've tried to go through this before. I spent hours on the phone with seller support, but then one day I decided actually I'm going to stop doing this and outsource it to someone on Fiverr, and it usually costs me about £30 to £40 a time, and some of them might be quick jobs, but some of them have literally saved me hours and hours for the sake of probably 30 to 40 pound, which is an absolutely crazy return on my time investment and something that I would take every single time. Now, one thing you do need to bear in mind, especially if you are working a job, is you need to look at what your hourly rate is and then what the hourly rate for any jobs within the business are. Because if your goal is to try and make as much money as quickly as possible to be able to get to where your dream life is, then anything that is worth less than the time you get paid at your job, you should not be doing. So for example, if you're getting paid £20 an hour to work your job and you maybe need to do some video editing, and you know you can go on Fiverr and hire a video editor that works out roughly about £15 an hour. You are better off hiring someone to edit that video for you, and then you spend that time working in your job, because then you're actually making a profit for the same amount of time. Then you're making more money than you would have been saving by doing that job yourself. So it is definitely worth thinking about these kind of things, again, especially when you're still working a job. Now, if there's no other way for you to earn that income back, then maybe there's other ways to think about it, which again is probably why I did design that Shopify store myself back in the day. The one thing you do have to remember is when you're looking for any kind of freelancer to do any kind of work, there are so many freelancers covering so many different aspects of work that you can find pretty much anyone to do pretty much anything. The second point is a lot of these freelancers are going to be from poorer countries than probably where you're from, either in the UK or the US or some other country. Is that these guys, you know, maybe they're working from India or Pakistan, where the living wages aren't as high as in the Western world. So then for them, if they're earning £1,000 a month, that's a pretty good wage. Versus for us in the UK, you know, you need to be earning 3, 4, 5 plus £1,000 just to be on like an average wage or slightly above average. So whilst you might think that, oh, this job's going to be really expensive, you've got to remember that a lot of these people that are going to be doing these sorts of menial tasks for you are in less developed countries, potentially with a much lower living wage that is needed to live over there. So they can earn a lot less than you, but still feel richer than you themselves. So it's actually a win-win for everyone, because you can help someone by earning £1,000 to £2,000 a month, which could be the same as earning £5,000 to £6,000 a month, for example, over here in the UK. And obviously, if you're earning that sort of money over here, you're on a pretty good salary, and probably the same over there for a lot less. So it can go both ways, and not only does it help you improve your business and free up your time from the jobs that you just don't need to be doing, it does also help out these freelancers as well. So just to recap on this point, when you're hiring or looking for people to help you within your business, make sure, especially if you are working a job, to always hire someone who you can pay less than whatever your current hourly rate is that you're earning at your job. The next point is also, remember, with these freelancers, a lot of them come from countries where they can easily earn a much lower living wage. So you don't need to feel that these people are going to charge an absolute arm and a leg, because they were probably a hell of a lot cheaper than the same sort of person in a Western country. And finally, we're going to move on to the point that I spoke about very briefly at the start of this video, and that is actually having a good accountant. Now, for me, I did not have the proper systems in place with my accountants to send me up-to-date profit and loss sheets every month, because this is your absolute bread and butter of your business, and you should be knowing your profit and loss, and your cash flow especially is so, so important. I know there were times for me, I think just when I crossed that £100,000 a year mark, there were times where I was having to take money out of my personal savings, pay off my Amex card, because I just didn't know what my cash flow was, and I thought I'd be okay, and then I ended up being £1,000 or a few £100s short of paying off my American Express. So then I had to borrow that from myself for a few days or a few weeks to pay that off. So this is only something that I've very recently got sorted, and I now have the full accounting services, and just to be clear, just because I've got the full service doesn't mean it's more expensive. I'm actually paying a little bit less, I think it's about 10% less a month than I was paying before, and I have a much more professional outfit of accountants that give me all of the information I need as a business owner. So this is so important. Don't skimp on your accountants, but also make sure you're not being ripped off by them as well. Some of them might try and charge you extortionate bookkeeping fees, where at that point you may need to look at having your accounting done separately to your bookkeeper. But also just remember that accounting is just a business. They might pretend to be your friend, but they only care about your business especially these smaller accounting firms. So make sure you get one that's aligned with your goals and actually understands your business as well, because e-commerce is slightly more complex than some of these other businesses, even just on the fact of an e-commerce business would generally have a hell of a lot more transactions in their business than, say, a dentist or another more traditional business. If you think about e-commerce, you've probably got a hell of a lot more transactions for the same amount of revenue as one of these other businesses. So sometimes you do need to save some money on your bookkeeping, either by doing it yourself. Even nowadays, you can use AI tools to help you with your bookkeeping as well. So going on to my story about how I got screwed over by my accountant, and this is definitely a lesson for anyone out there whose accountants try anything similar. They basically tried to backdate charge me for my business growing and them not updating my fees in line with that. So I had a call with my accountant sometime last year, and they basically told me my accounting fee was going to nearly triple in monthly price, which was just absolutely mind-blowing. But when they explained it to me, it did make sense, because they had me on an old plan, I think from when I was doing like roughly $250,000 a year. And then when I was getting much closer to $1 million a year and just sort of crossing over that sometime last year, they then had a call with me and said, actually, you're much bigger than what you were when we last checked your fees, so we do need to increase it. So it did make sense, and I did think it was fair enough. Fast forward to a couple of months ago, my accountant then calls me up and basically says that he wants to charge me £5,000 for last year when I was on a plan that was too low for the amount of income I was making, and I nearly paid this. Now this actually ties in with one of my earlier thoughts about having a mentor, and it was only because I brought this point up to my mentor that they actually said to me that, well, Ben, like, hang on a minute, like, you cannot pay this, they cannot charge you this business. It's the same as if I went back to my customers and said, actually, I didn't make enough profit on what I sold you last year, can you pay me an extra £5,000 to make up so I don't lose out on money? That is not how business works. It is really bad business practice to do that. And if you're an accountant or any kind of service business is trying to charge you backdated fees like this for their mistake, then that should instantly raise alarm bells in your minds. Now it did for me. I was like, this doesn't seem right, but I just assumed that this was a normal thing, but obviously it's not normal, and I have now since moved on from that accounting firm. But that is something to absolutely be aware of, that your accountants might try and take you for a ride, especially if you're growing at such an incredible speed. And I think for me, last year was that time when I really exploded the growth of the business, and they almost couldn't keep up, and they weren't keeping up. And I think it's about 9 months after we moved the plan, they then tried charging me backdated fees up to about 18 months before. So it is absolutely not something they could do. They didn't even try and offer me a discount on the backdated fees. They were just saying, yep, you need to pay all of this for something that was our mistake. And I can't actually believe that I very nearly paid this money, and I nearly lost out on £5,000. And by the way, that is £5,000 plus VAT. So, you know, £6,000, and then I'd be able to claim the VAT back. But it's absolutely extortionate amount of money, and something I would recommend to anyone to check up with. And it again ties into my point about making sure that you have a mentor. So when you get these things that happen in business, because I'm now nearly 4 years into my e-commerce journey, and there is clearly still things that I do not know, and this is why it's so important to have a mentor to go over these points with, because there's always going to be someone out there that knows a little bit more than you. So just to recap on this final point, is to make sure you know your profit and loss and your cash flow at least monthly, because that is so important. And finally, don't let anyone take you for a ride, especially your accountant, if you're growing quickly, by charging you backdated fees. Now, if you thought this video was helpful, then check out this next video on the end screen, and thank you for watching.